everyone. Welcome to another Fossil Friday web chats with the Western Science Center and the Raymond M. Alf Museum. I am Brittney Stoneburg. I'm the Outreach and Communications Coordinator for the Western Science Center. Joining with me today is Gabriel Santos, as always, the Outreach and Communications Coordinator for the Raymond M. Alf Museum.
Hi.
And impeccably dressed as always. All right, Wilderness Explorers. And today we're joined by Michael Ziegler. Hey, Michael, how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me, Brittney and Gabe.
Of course. Can you just describe where you're at right now?
Yeah. So right now I am actually in the one of the Gainesville creeks. And just a little disclaimer: it is gorgeous out here right now. Not too hot, not too cold. And one thing is, I'm going to be showing some of the collection techniques that we use as amateurs and professional paleontologists alike. There's a lot of similarities. And two stories based off of undergraduate and graduate research that involve amateur paleontology, and then the research that happened after initial excavation. So Florida's collection laws are a little bit different than other states. I am distancing from everyone else, but are just a note that check your local state.
Cool. I think our viewers will really like this this look into paleontology from the fields. And I know I'm very pleased to be looking at Florida's gorgeous forests again.
Yeah, I never thought I'd say that, but
No, I'm missing Florida quite a bit.
Hey, it's awesome right now.
Us California desert people are not meant for Florida, but right now it sounds pretty great.
Yeah. Michael knows the last time I visited, the humidity was killer, but it's gorgeous.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's less of a swamp right now and more of an oasis. I'm sure when that spring heat hits, then the swamp's coming back. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, a little information on Michael. He's a researcher at the Florida Museum of Natural History, interested in paleoecology, sedimentology, and K-12 science education. He recently earned his master's degree in geology. Congratulations, Michael.
Woo!
And his focused on reconstructing the environment of a recently discovered fossil site in Florida named Montbrook, which you guys may remember from a couple weeks back. When not digging in the dirt on dry land, Michael enjoys exploring the underwater world of rivers and scuba diving for fossils, just like in the promo photo that we used for you, where you're scuba diving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you? I know because I'm a nerd and kind of obsessed, but can you describe the fossil in that picture of you where you're scuba diving that we use? Can you describe that fossil?
Yeah, so that was on some pretty the story behind that one. I mean, it was a pretty exciting find, not only because it's a fossil, but also it was placed right next to a gator that seemed to be protecting it. I didn't really notice it when I was going for it, but it was like maybe a 4-foot-ish gator. And the stream was pretty heavy, so I was using a rock to weigh myself down. I had to decide maybe to like fight off the gator or like grab the fossil and go. So grab the fossil and let the current take me, and I just floated down the river a little bit. But that is a juvenile mastodon. That is one of the molars of the juvenile mastodon. Yeah.
I'm predictable, I know.
Yeah. Hey, awesome. Got to plug it in, right?
Awesome. So whenever you're ready, Michael, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let Gabe control the presentation part of this, and then afterwards I'll do a little walkabout in the creeks and show you some of the more significant techniques and things that we can gather, the story that we can gather from this creek.
Cool. Wilderness Explorer, ready to go.
Thing about outfit right now is it's the Wilderness Explorer Up, and if you remember, my favorite character from Up is that Kevin the bird. One cool connection is that
Kevin,
one of the most famous Florida was found recently is from Titanus walleri, or the terror bird. It looks eerily similar, but very cartoonish version of what Kevin looks like on Disney.
All right, Mike, your presentation is now running.
Okay, awesome. So, if I can.
Mike, your audio went off.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Great. So the first thing I wanted to dive into is just kind of give a general background on what I am interested in and what I study. So we have a photo from our Florida Museum collections area, and everyone's holding a few different vertebrate fossils. That is what I study is vertebrate paleontology. So basically anything with a backbone that has been preserved as a fossil or any indication of ancient life that has been preserved from these types of animals. And also what I'm interested in is sedimentology. So looking at the grain, like the individual sediment grains, and also large scale outcrops, geologic outcrops being anything exposed that we can look at, whether it be rock or down sediment, sand, clays, muds, anything like that. Altogether, why I like that is because it provides more of like a holistic picture, more of like a narrative. How did this site form? How do we find these fossils here? And what information can we gather from it? So in that regards, I am more of a generalist focusing on a wide breadth of animals and sites. And thankfully that's taken me around the world studying at different locations. And altogether, I like to piece that and bring it back because I don't think we would have without science education in K-12, kindergarten through and undergraduate research as well. I think they feed into one another. So I'm very passionate about doing my research, but also collaboratively with educators. So if you're interested, we always have workshops, whether it's Gabe and Brittney putting on stuff through the Cosplay for Science initiative or the My Fossil NSF funded grant that has passed, but we still have the website that is being run where you can find fossils or what maybe you think is a fossil and post it to one of our discussion boards, and we can help identify it. And one interesting thing is Victor Perez actually worked with an amateur paleontologist who found some pretty rare cookie cutter shark teeth, and they published a paper together too. So all that said, I love collaboration and I love so it's taken me all around the world, like I said. And the next slide is how did I get here? So that photo of me, I'm wearing a ATL hat that was taken by Gabe when I visited the Alf Museum in California. And I there me because I'm a Georgia boy at heart. I absolutely love my home state of Georgia. It has a tremendous amount of historical geology, a lot of great outcrops. I remember going young, we would go to Stone Mountain, which is just this extremely large granitic dome. It's absolutely wonderful. The same person that carved that mountain carved Mount Rushmore. So a lot of cool historical stuff. If you haven't seen Stone Mountain, go ahead and Google it. It's really cool. It's a great example of what we call spheroidal weathering. It's basically just the rounding off shape of harder rocks. And then to the right of me, I have a picture of my sister and I. She's wearing a little babushka and I'm wearing a beanie. That was when we first moved into our house in Georgia. And I'm on a pile of little granite rocks. We have some, we used to explore the backyards. So I wanted to give a quick shout out to my family. My parents pushed me into geology without even knowing. A lot of times they would send us outside and try to keep us busy. So I think by default, they helped me explore the outdoor world. And my sister has always been a big, well, she does some really cool stuff. She's a nurse back home, trying to keep people alive and I'm looking at a lot of dead stuff. So her job is much harder, but I love what I do. I want to give a quick shout out to them. So moving on, the second slide there, how did I get here? Everyone's educational journey is different. If you want to ask questions at the end, that would be fantastic about different things I did to get here. But these are just these are the things that kind of pivotal points in my life shaped what I'm interested in now. And thankfully, I got to have these experiences. So originally, I did some research at the Georgia College and State University. It's a very small liberal arts college in Milledgeville, Georgia. And just to give you some sort of like size, it's about like 5,000 or 6,000 students compared to 60,000. How many people were on campus coming from a small college like that? But even had a science and geology program, and I was very interested in at first studying just the soil, the sediment, and I had one professor, Dr. and this really cool fossil site I got to work at in Georgia. But interested, catching that paleontological bug and interested in continuing my education. We didn't necessarily have a field camp at our college since it was so small. But I applied for a bunch of different internships and eventually landed one in the Panama Canal, where they were excavating and widening the sides of the Panama Canal so that larger barges could make it through. And as they were doing that, they were unearthing all these crazy amount of fossils from the Great American Biotic Interchange, which is essentially where the staged process of South America and North America colliding, and that rise of the Isthmus of Panama, or that land bridge connecting North America and South America. So even though Panama is such a tiny strip of land, if you look at it on a map, I mean, it's given us a tremendous amount of information in regards to climate changing due to ocean circulation, the different fossils that change that moved from South America to North America and vice versa. So that crazy biotic experiment in fauna or animals coming north and south. And from that, I was absolutely hooked. I wanted to work more on how to diagnose how, or not necessarily diagnose, but figure out how sites are formed and why we find fossils in the areas that we do. So from that, I applied for the Kubifora Field School, and that was in Kenya, opposite side of the world, but same sort of techniques that we use globally were found in this site. So from that photo, you can see there's a square that we mapped all the different artifacts that we found, a bunch of stone tools, and some fish fossils and a few other things found from that site. But the technique across. Then from there, I wanted to work more on my own project and from start to finish, and collaborate with others who are interested in it. So thankfully, I got into the Florida Museum of Natural History, working with them, and then into graduate school at University of Florida, collaborating with educators and students and paleontologists at the Montbrook Fossil Site. So if we move to the next slide, I wanted to go through the two main research projects that involve not only local creeks or water still present, but then the story behind it as well. So my undergraduate research, what I'm looking at for that was a fossil site in Brunswick, Georgia, and it was producing some phenomenal fossils of bison latifrons, which is, if not one of, it was the largest ungulate or hoofed animal in the fossil record. And it is the largest bovid, so a split-hoofed animal. So what we're looking at there is there are other sort of animals considered to be bovids, like buffalo, antelopes, impalas, different cattle like cows, goats, and then really cute animals called dik-diks, which look like small deer, really adorable. And all examples of these bovids at different scales, but these guys were massive. These bison latifrons, they lived during the Pleistocene times, which, if you look at it geologically, 2.6 million to about 11 or 10,000 years ago. And they went extinct during the last glacial maximum. So around 30 to 20,000 years ago, the glacial maximum, meaning when we had an increase in the Antarctic ice sheets. So it would also cause a drop in sea level. So if you imagine all that water accumulating and freezing in ice sheets instead of being that fluid ocean volume. So a drop in sea level and an increase in ice there. So these animals were about maybe 8 feet tallish and had a horn width of about 10 to 12 feet. Absolutely massive creatures, and certainly megafauna. Megafauna just meaning large animals. The threshold for that can span anywhere from 40 kilograms to 1,000. 1,000 kilograms being about a ton. These guys were about 2,000 kilograms estimated. And the cool thing at this site, we can move to the next slide, but this site produced a tremendous amount of fossil material, a lot from extinct bison, some frogs. We also had some birds there, but there were a lot of really small, unique features on these, some small, some large features on these bones that showed evidence that they were being considered prey, and predators were scavenging or feeding and even killing these animals. But the weird thing, the mystery that comes in here, is that we didn't find any, or when their initial excavations were going on, they didn't find any examples of predators at the site, which caused a little bit of a mystery there. So we have a lot of animals that could be preying on these large bison or even scavenging on them. And you Game of Thrones fans will probably recognize on the bottom left, we have the dire wolf or Canis dirus. So those were real animals, larger than modern day wolves, and they were more like scavengers hunting, but also short-faced bears, large saber-toothed cats. We had American lions on the North American landscape around then. Thankfully, they are extinct now. We don't have to worry about that, but we still have the alligator as well. So what we did is we created a lineup of the usual suspects, possible predators and scavengers that could be feeding on these bones. So to give you some examples of some of the other marks that we found on these bones, if we move to the next page, we have what we call taphonomic alterations. So taphonomy essentially is the science of the fossilization of bones from their death to burial, fossilization, and all the different processes and weird caveats that can happen before we find them as paleontologists. And we can find out a lot of just from reading these fossils. If you want to learn more about taphonomy and taphonomic alteration, the study of it, look up Dr. Kate Beringsmeyer. She's one of the scientists who pioneered this field of studies, and it's really interesting what you can find out from it. So over the 500 bones that I analyzed here, we had strong evidence that a lot of them were altered. So the first sort of alteration technique that we're going to look at is furrow marks. So if you look at this metacarpal, so it's going to be one of the hand bones of that bison. You're going to be looking at the furrow marks, and that could be represented as a deep groove. So if you can imagine, what I like to do an analogy to is think about your pet dog at home. If you give them a bone, how do they chew, right? They usually bite into it or put it in the back of their mouth, and they're going to be gnawing on it. And if you looked at that bone, you would see a bunch of marks. And a lot of these marks are going to be similar to things that you could test out with maybe giving your dog a bone, or versus a cat. A cat, if you give them bone or a fish carcass, if you see the way that they eat meat, they're very selective. Same in the way that they love people, right? So they're very, very selective, and they're very methodical the way that they chew. So that's going to translate to the fossil record as well. Dog is going to be all over the place. Those marks are going to be cross-hatched and looking like this, and all no orientation. Whereas cat marks usually felid will have very trended grooves. So if we look at the next slide, we also have scalloped out areas. And this is where you can picture your dog gnawing on a bone, where it is biting into this bone and trying to get to the marrow as well, which is very nutrient rich. And it can cause these little crescent-shaped, similar to like the crescent-shaped moon, right? So that like rounded half circle is moving that material. And this is the sacrum, essentially where that backbone is going to be hitting your hip sort of area there. So we had scalloped out parts. And if you move to the next one of the most common fossils we find are the ribs. And they had puncture marks. This is a really great example of one. You can see on the side closest to that scale bar, you have those deep pitted puncture marks. And if you can imagine on your own mouth, if you bite something, you got a top set of teeth and a bottom set. So if you find puncture marks on that side of the rib, you're likely going to find one on the bottom, or at least some sort of depression where the bone was crushed a little bit from that force acting on it. So we also had these puncture marks, which were incredible to see. Looking at the next slide, like I was telling you before, the puncture marks often are complemented by those depressed puncture marks. So it is compressing that material and causing these little pools or these little depressions. Here we have a neck vertebra, and you can see in the bottom left of that blowout figure, it is more of a square part. There are points, little points where you would possibly have a tooth cusp that was puncturing a little bit further down than those flatter parts on your molar. Molars have different parts to it with the cusp being able to puncture, but those flatter parts have more surface area for crushing or grinding up. And we're going to look at a few fossils in the Gainesville Creeks here, these Florida fossils that use crushing techniques, puncturing techniques, and grasping techniques. So that's another facet of taphonomy that you also have to figure out too, is like what modes of feeding are going on here. So if we move to the last technique of taphonomic alteration, we have the spiral fracture. So this is on the mid shaft of Cutis arm bone. But the unique thing about these spiral fractures are they can happen from a variety of different processes, possibly due to trampling, a larger animal stepping on it. You could have it even just from being mobilized in a very energy-rich environment. It could be tumbled and eventually break. We also could have some sort of exposure to the elements. So sun baking it can also create cracks in bones that let them become more friable and fragile, and they can break as well. Or they could be broken by the sheer force of an animal crushing down on it. So these are all things that we made note of when we were researching these fossils and trying to figure out who the culprit was, what animals were most likely feeding on these extremely large animals, these bison latifrons. So to test this, I moved to the next slide here. I used skulls of modern lion and also fossilized direwolf skulls, anything that I could use at the Georgia College Natural History Museum. But specimens that we can't get, right? Like some of them are a little bit more rare. We didn't necessarily have a full saber-toothed cat skull. We had some isolated teeth that I could test out with. We had some molds that had been created, but we didn't have what I would consider the best analog to test this out. And I wanted to see how these jaws possibly were crushing or wrapping around these bones. So one thing we can do is use 3D printed sources. So all these fossils and all these skulls are 3D printed skulls. These were all found on online 3D repositories, mainly Morphosaurus, which is a site that you can go onto, create a free profile, and you can download these 3D prints. I use that one mainly because those fossils are associated with a museum, so they've been cataloged. We know generally where they're from, how old they are, and what species they are. But also sites like Sketchfab are great places to find 3D printed skulls or 3D files of skulls. The Idaho Natural History Virtual Museum Lab or something. There's a lot of words in that one, but that also has a lot of great Pleistocene predators and megafauna as well. So I grabbed a few of those from those. Altogether, I used real and 3D printed fossils to see what kind of animals were making these marks on the fossils. And all this was created into a lesson plan that is freely available and part of the My Fossil and I Dig Fossils projects, where we try to incorporate education and paleontology into STEM or science, technology, engineering, and math practices. That's partially why I named this talk Streaming, because paleontology is so multidisciplinary. We use a ton of different techniques to try to narrow them down into stream, being science, technology, reading, engineering, arts, and math. It would be hard to do, but we do use all those different techniques. And looking at the next slide here is how I use that into a K-12 lesson plan. I worked with Dr. Liz Lewis. She's a fantastic teacher in Louisiana, New Orleans. And this is us creating a lesson plan based on this authentic research that I did as an undergraduate. So it's a pretty cool storyline because these fossils were found by kids playing in a stream in Georgia, and eventually they caught the eye of my professor, Dr. Al Mead, and they excavated it. Dr. Al Mead and now Dr. David Patterson, they excavated these fossils, and they found so many different fossils. And eventually, I researched to see what kind of animals were chewing on these, and after that research, it was also turned into a lesson plan. So other students, probably of a similar age, who found these in the Georgia creeks, can study this lesson and learn some of these authentic research practices. So we created this lab, and I'll give you the predator that was mainly chewing and scavenging on these bones was that dire wolf. That's mainly because this site, after a little bit more analysis, it was figured to be a bone dam. So if you can picture a bunch of bones and a big storm event comes in, it churns up all that sediment, sands, clay, and the fossils that are embedded in it as well. And it brings it downstream, and then they accumulate in this massive deposit. And we can tell that because of the orientation of the bones. So there was just a hodgepodge of all these bones accumulated in one spot. So they probably were deposited somewhere else, remobilized, and then deposited downstream. And the predator that was feeding on these mainly was the dire wolf. So I wanted to lead into my next sort of story is my graduate research. So that next slide has a photo of my advisor, Bruce Fadden, and then our 7 different graduate students. It's pretty uncommon to have such a large lab size, but it's great because we all worked on different things. Starting from the left, that's me at the Montbrook Fossil Site, and that's what I'm researching. And I'm going to give you a little bit of information, hopefully some different stuff than what Jeanette did a couple of weeks ago, and I made sure to have some different aspect of the research in this talk. And then next to me we have Isaac Magallanes, and that's who gave the talk 2 weeks ago. He's now at the University of Chicago, but he also researched at the University of Florida here, and we're good friends and colleagues. Next to him, we have Sean Moran, who's studying fossils out in the Badlands of the United States. So he's researching some pretty cool stuff as well. Jeanette, next to him, she's researching Montbrook. She did her talk a little while ago, and she's focusing on the Proboscidean, specifically the Gomphothere, or the elephant-like animal at Montbrook, and try to figure those out. In that background there, we have Perez. He's one of the experts on megalodon fossils in Florida. And he's originally from Maryland, so he's pretty much all East Coast fossils. He's your guy. He's really good at identifying shark's teeth, and he publishes a lot on that research. Next to him is Claudia Grant. She studies education and how do we incorporate paleontology in education. And next to her is Michelle Barbosa, who is one of the founding members of as well. And she studied Florida fossils. Specifically, she was looking at horses fossils. So collectively, we study a lot of different things, but here we are all together excavating at the Montbrook fossil site. And to the right of that photo is a picture of me. Some of the research techniques I did was measuring and identifying these different sediments and what we can interpret from them. How do we provide a story of this site? It was originally found, if we move to the next slide there, you should have a nice virtual tour, some drone imagery of the Montbrook fossil site. Very serendipitous find. It was found by the granddaughter of the site owner in 2015. So I hope you're starting to get some sort of idea that a lot of these fossil sites that we find that become world-class sites are found by amateur paleontologists or kids in their backyards looking for, or just playing around and maybe looking for arrowheads. That's what this young lady was looking for. But she did find a fossil, and afterwards, I mean, we found over 50,000 fossils just from this one site, and it's becoming one of the most important sites in Florida, if not the Southeast United States. And it's all been excavated by volunteers. Right now, we're not in our field season, and we are shut down, isolating as well. But hopefully when we get up and running again, if you're 15 years of older, you can come and volunteer. I had something pop up on my screen. Can you still hear me, Gabe?
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay, good. Did I cut out at all?
Just for a couple seconds.
Okay. Great. So this site has been all excavated by volunteers. And if we look at the next page or next slide here, I have a sketch of what the fossil site looks like. It essentially looks like an underground pool, and it hasn't been excavated by huge machinery like bulldozers or those large caterpillars moving sediment. It's been excavated mainly by our favorite tool is a screwdriver, because we have to be because once at fossil, we need to make sure where it came from, because it loses some of its value scientifically if we don't have the information associated with it. And we want to make sure not to break it too. But we break fossils all the time, which is not a problem. But this site, if you can see, it has a grid system as well. All these different squares are areas in the fossil site where volunteers excavate. We were focusing on this sort of northwestern area here. There were a ton of Gomphothere skulls being found there, those elephant-like animals. And the only problem about this particular site, at least, have a lot of work like our isotope data is not going to work very well. A lot of these sediments have been remobilized and they have been chemically altered due to the environment. But thankfully, we can use the fossils as well to potentially get an estimated age. So if we look at the next slide here, we have some of the more charismatic creatures found at the site. There are a ton of fish found there. I like to call Montbrook a surf and turf site because we do have a lot of fish found only in ocean environments, some found only in freshwater environments, and then we have a lot of terrestrial animals living on the landscape as well. So we have this first image is a turtle shell found at the site called Trachemes inflata. So it is related to living slider turtles. This is a really great preserved shell from the site, but this is one of the most common fossils that we find. If we look at the next slide, one of the most rare fossils that we have found at the site is of a fossil bird, a fossil heron. So this is the sort of shoulder area of the bird found at Montbrook, and it is a new genus of heron found, not just the new species, but new genus found, and it was named after the site's owner, and it's called the Hodges tiger heron. So we find something great in paleontology, you could get something named after you, which is a pretty cool bonus. So looking at the next fossil we have Borages hilli, or the bone crushing dog. So this is the lower jaw, or the mandible, the right side of it. You can see those awesome teeth that would be great for puncturing, chewing, and slicing off meat as well as a prey. If we look at the next slide, we have our Hexamerix simpsoni. This is our six-horned pronghorn. Pretty rare fossil found, and we have this beautifully preserved horns of this fossil here. The next slide is one of the more common ones that we find as well. Pretty exciting though to find. I'm sure some of you might recognize this from Jeanette's talk, but this is the mandible, lower jaw, and we have one tusk there of a gomphotherium, an elephant-like animal. Unique thing about these gomphotheres are they're gonna have two tusks on their upper and lower jaws, so 4 total, which look a little bit different from our modern Asian elephants. The next fossil that we have is a little less common found. I love throwing this one in. I know that in Jeanette's talk we saw it, but for those of you who didn't tune into that, it's just worth seeing. It is a gomphotherium jaw, and then that Trachemes inflata, that fossil turtle, inside of the jaw as well. So we have almost like a little turduncan situation going on with this turtle inside of the jaw. It was not chewing on it. It wasn't feeding on it. Likely what happened is, if you picture this, we jacketed, or we put a plaster cast around this fossil. And then as it was being prepped out, it was found that this turtle was inside the jaw there. But if you can imagine, it was upside down. So probably that turtle died first, fell to the bottom of that shallow river sort of environment that we're looking at. And then the jaw of that gomphotherium probably settled on top of it post-mortem or after death there, and it probably crushed it a little bit, and that's likely how it happened there. If we look at the next fossil, on the next slide, we have the Astragalus calcaneum ankle sort of area of our Cheloceras, our short-legged rhinos. We had those on the landscape of Florida as well. Altogether, you should start seeing that we had a lot of pretty weird animals that we don't see on Florida landscape today, that are more reflective of what the African Serengeti looks like today than what this crazy green environment that I'm in right now in Florida. And then if we look at the last fossil, we have a cat, Smilodon, found at the site as well. So these are some of the more rare fossils found at the site, and collectively they do give us some sort of age through a process called biochronology. So we're using these animals So bio, life, chronology, order, time. So it's sort of like a Venn diagram to see, okay, if we have all these animals here, where do they overlap in geologic time? And that's how we get this sort of late Miocene, early Pliocene age of 7 million to 4 million-ish years old. But we still haven't been able to pinpoint that exact date yet. Hopefully, future research will get that done. So if we look at the next slide, this goes more on what I was working on, the fossils and the sediments. We have some really cool sediment deposits found. That top left image kind of looks like if you buy chocolate and vanilla ice cream. It's marbled. There's been some sort of folding. If you can imagine, so altogether, we use these sediments and these fossils to figure out what the ancient environment of Montbrook would look like. So if we look at the pretty much the last slide that I'm going to show here is Montbrook in comparison to the Gainesville Creeks, which are where I'm at right now. Montbrook is a little bit younger. These Gainesville Creeks are going to be around like 8 to 9 million-ish years old. We have older sediments here as well as younger. But what I'm going to do is go through the creek a little bit and show you some of the techniques that we use as paleontologists and that you can use as well. So the tool that I'm going to be using is pretty simple. I like to either just look on these banks for fossils or use a colander. So simple colander that you would use to drain pasta. You can take this out to the creeks and look for some fossils as well. I'm gonna walk up creek and show you a good area of where it would be good to look for fossils. And then we'll take some questions afterwards as well. Sorry, we ran out of time a little bit. So I'm gonna try to be as stable as possible so we don't get any motion sickness here. But as we go up the creeks here, you can see that this is pretty shallow water, but it's right after a big rain event, which is one of the best times to go look for fossils because it churns up all this sediment. And if you look in here, you can see all the different ripples in the stream here, and then some of the gravel. So there's larger pieces of rock and fossil. So I'm gonna go up creek here, found a really good bank that we can look at. And some of the best places to look for fossils are gonna be these gravel beds because they're not that really fine sand or clay. They're more so right here. You can see it. There's a bunch of gravel in here. So what I would do is go towards the end of the creek here, grab a good scoop of that, and then we just do a little bit of sifting to see what sort of things we can find in here. So what this is basically mirroring is the preferential sorting or of different sized grains here. So we have a ton of rock, smaller rock. Let's see if we can find fossil in here. I was out here maybe 10 minutes before we went live, and I found a couple dozen. Here is a very small shark's tooth. And those are some of the most common fossils that we are going to find in these creeks, mainly because fossils of Florida, these sharks can shed 10,000s of teeth over the lifetime. They grow sort of like variables. But we also have a few other very common fossils we found at the site. This was found last week. This is part of a dugong rib or a sea cow, sort of like manatee. This is the very dense rib of one of those animals. But I did just right before we went live, found a rock, some sediment that had been with, I was trying to focus a little bit. There is a fossil shark tooth eroding out of that there. We have a ton of snaggletooth, lemon shark, different species, and then probably the most charismatic. This one was not found in Gainesville Creeks. This is a teaching tool found from Florida. But this is a megalodon shark teeth, and the unique characteristic of that is what we call a burlette or a chevron. It's that black band that you can see on this very pronounced shark's tooth. Pretty small for a megalodon tooth, but if you can imagine, you can't have all of the same size teeth because it would be very hard to close the back part of your mouth there. So I think I'll end, stop talking for a second. If there's any questions, because I don't want to run out of time, I want to make sure everyone can ask a question if they want.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
And I miss Florida.
I know. Yeah. It's really nice. I have a bunch of other stuff in my backpack I was going to show, but there's just so much stuff going on here. Within 10 minutes, just found a ton of stuff.
That's so cool. Here's a good question. This is from Sophia. What's the weirdest animal you've ever found?
Yeah, there's so many different weird extinct animals. I think probably my favorite, most recent one, well, actually, I'll do two. I'm sorry, I can't pick a favorite. But I'd say Florida specific. If you think about giant ground sloth, Megatherium, those things are just beastly. They are insane, about 9-10 feet tall, massive claws. Those things are wild to think about because we always think about very cutesy 2-3-toed sloths, but these guys were massive. So probably that's probably my favorite sort of fossil. But the favorite one that I found that was probably the weirdest was of a marsupial lion in Australia. So we found it's almost like a blade-like tooth. If you look up marsupial lions from Australia, pretty weird animals. Same as modern day, they have some of the freakiest stuff. Like animals called like Macropus. They were giant, extinct kangaroo. So we found the middle toe bone of these guys, and they were about 7-8 inches long. Pretty wild.
That is so cool.
Yeah. I'm still mad I didn't go on that trip with you.
Lost out, Gabe.
Oh, it was incredible. I sent you a bunch of photos though. You got to hang out with Dr. Lisa White though, which I was jealous about that. So
yeah, evened out.
Yeah. Let's see. Ooh, this is cool. This is from Ines, and she's from Germany. She's asking, what excites you most about your job, and where would you like to excavate next, or just do something totally different?
Yeah, that's a great question. What excites me about my job? I think it goes back to the different passions that I have. I like mysteries. I will say paleontology is a lot of reading and writing, which were definitely not my strong suits growing up. But it's something that I've come to appreciate a little bit more. It's still something I have to work very hard at. So some of my favorite aspects of my job is being out in the field. I love outside. That's kind of what got me into this. And also the education part too. So the collaboration between authentic research and then developing lab activities with teachers and students. I think either one can't work without the other one in effectively. Like they balance each other out so much. So those are my things I love about this job. The next place that I would like to excavate, there's a really cool, I wonder if you know this, Brittney. There's a great mammoth site in Vail, I think, Colorado. Yeah, but it's called the Ziegler Reservoir.
Ooh.
Of course.
Yeah, you got to do that one.
Oh,
no.
wait.
Oh,
There he's back.
there he is. We're good.
Hey, sorry. Where did I cut out? Did I get to?
We see you. Although you are upset.
Okay,
You are
You're kind of tilted. There you go.
There you go.
There, better. Okay. So the next place I would probably want to excavate, just because it's called Ziegler Reservoir, which is my last name. It's in Colorado, and it has a ton of mammoths. So I think that would be pretty cool to do.
Awesome. Okay, here's another one. This is from D. Is your lab work primarily done at the Florida Museum of Natural History too? And will your finds all be housed there?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I primarily work at the Florida Museum of Natural History because I'm through the geology department. That's what I graduated through. But all of our fossils are stored through the Florida Museum of Natural History. So everything that was in my project that I found, there was a small Gomphothere rib, a fragment of that found in my section, my geologic section, that'll be housed in our collections. But a lot of the techniques that I used were done in the geology building, so on campus there. But thankfully, I could do that pretty much anywhere. In the chemical analyses, all I needed was a microscope and looking at the individual grains and the microfossils at my site as well. So everything will be, all the sediment that I analyzed, that'll stay with me just because in case I need to publish further on it, I need my samples there, but all the fossils will stay with them.
Cool.
Nice.
And then
yeah,
this is a great question from Maddie, who says, congratulations on getting your master's. What is next?
Thank you. What's next? Okay, so yeah, so what's next for me? I'm applying for a lot of different jobs, and a lot of them work in natural history museums, doing research on collections, as well as connecting with outreach and education, because those are all my passions. I think that can be done in a museum, but also it can be done through a PhD as well. Because the great thing about a PhD is you can make it anything that you want, right? It's usually going towards answering a larger question, but the different projects that you focus on are kind of up to you. So I'm applying for museum jobs right now, but also applying for PhDs.
Cool.
I got a question for you, Mike. So here in California, we have very specific laws for fossil collecting, right? Like people can't go just everywhere. We have to have permits. You need to make sure you always have permission wherever you go.
Right.
In Florida, how's it different? How can someone responsibly and safely go look for fossils in like where you are right now?
Right, that's a great question. So Florida wants to protect the environment as well, and a lot of our laws try to protect the homeowner. So you can't go in people's backyards because you don't want to. One of the problems that happens, since Florida is covered with sediments, we don't have igneous and metamorphic rocks outcropping. We have all these sediments. It's very easily erodible. So if you dig into the side of these banks of the river, they're going to collapse, and that's not great for people's property. So this is all not on people's property. You go into these creeks, and you also have to apply for a permit, and you can get that through the Florida Museum of Natural History. If you just Google that, you can do that. So that's how we try to make sure that we are doing it respectively and not infringing on anyone's private property. So that's what I would go to first. And if you do Google that, there are a ton of links to our different projects like My Fossil, which you can use the information from other amateur paleontologists about best practices, where to go, and things like that, and things that you can find so you can identify them as well.
Awesome. If somebody were to find something, where could they go to get it identified if they are having trouble themselves? Could they do that on My Fossil?
Yeah, you can do that on My Fossil. There are different forums, little discussion boards that you can post to. I know there are fossil shark discussion that's regulated, and you have amateurs, paleontologists, and those working at museums as well on that board. We have one through the Mongolian Institute for the Study of Mongolian Dinosaurs. That one's mainly towards the educational side of it. We don't have excavations going on there, but there are fossils found on that landscape. So this is a project that can be used as a source to identify things.
Nice. So basically, it's just always better to have permission before you start excavating anywhere, is kind of the general rule.
Yeah, it's definitely good to have permission. And also, if you find something, if it's related to like human artifacts like pottery or stone tools, that's against the law to collect and to remove from the area. So a lot of what we get emails at the museum, people take photos of it, or you can GPS it on your phone and send it to them. Hey, like these artifacts have been found. We're not going to remove them. Same with fossils. If you want to GPS them, that's a fantastic thing to do, just to locate where they've been found. That's how the Montbrook fossil site was found as well, because it was recorded by that family who found the thing. And they're interested in finding more of the scientific value behind it.
Awesome.
Alrighty. One last quick question from another Michael. What do you do?
Nice. Good question. I honestly, I love kayaking, and I like being out in the water and in nature. So I play a lot of frisbee golf. I kayak a good bit too, and I love to scuba dive as well. So pretty much, if you got me outside, if I have a hammock, something to throw, or something to dig up, I'm pretty happy. That's what I do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Awesome, everyone. Well, we will be back today at 3 p.m. for another Fossil Friday web chat, and that one will be very special because it's going to be with the hosts of PBS Eons. So join us again at 3 p.m. For another chat with them, with Blake and Callie from PBS Eons. And as always, if you guys want to support our museum programs, there will be links to do that after this live stream ends. So thank you all for joining us.
Bye, everybody.